Yay! What is up, everybody? Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 235.
We're up there.
Oh, we are.
We are.
We're not even getting up there. We're there.
We're just
this is
there
it.
now.
Very excited about tonight's show. Our guest tonight, talk about badass. We have lots of badasses on this show week after week. Our guest tonight, Christof Teuscher, has set that bar so high. We have guests on here all the time that have run incredible races, big endurance events, have won races, and ventured across the globe. Our guest tonight tends to take adventure to the next level. He does these huge projects, these adventures and endurance events that are so next level. For example, we're going to talk to him specifically about this tonight, but he did the rim to rim to rim crossing in the Grand Canyon, which is you go from South Rim to North Rim and then back to the South Rim.
Challenging.
Very challenging in and of its own right. A lot of people have this on their bucket list. He did it 4 times in a row. So he did 8 crossings of the Grand Canyon, 4 rim to rim to rim crossings. You write it out, R to 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 R. I might have added an extra R. I don't know. It's hilarious. But the undertaking is not. So Christof Teuscher is joining us tonight. I'm very excited about it because we're going to learn so much about what it's like to adventure, what it takes, and all that stuff. So sit back, relax, everyone. Grab your beverage of choice. Ginger Runner Live begins now. Ginger Runner. Yay! What is up, everybody? Welcome to Ginger Runner Live, episode number 235. We have Gus down here, just excited to be a part of tonight's show. He won't leave us alone.
I wish we could actually have a camera on his face right now because he looks very excited.
All right, so this is what we're going to do over the holidays. We're going to get an extra camera. We're going to plug it into the system, and we're going to have a Gus Cam. The Gus Cam will be a part of our show because he's either wired or sleeping soundly, and I think the audience really loves that. Welcome to the show, everyone. We really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy Mondays to spend a little bit of it with us. Or if you're listening on the podcast version, which was just updated, by the way, today, all podcast episodes are updated to wherever you download your podcast from. So if you have a road trip coming up or a big, long run coming up and you need some of this deep, sultry voice to listen to, go download all the podcasts. We are all the way up to episode 234. And then tonight, I'm going to drop this episode up there too. And drop a review on iTunes. I realize that's how the rankings are all determined, is by begging and pleading for reviews. So if you haven't, consider it. All right. Tonight's episode is going to be a lot of fun. Our guest is a powerhouse when it comes to ultra running and adventuring. He's a local Pacific Northwesterner. I met him years. Gus is already pining. So if you need to go grab him,
I'm going to quickly go grab him.
As I introduce our guest, though. I met him by happenstance at the beginning. Also, good use of the word happenstance. Kim looked at me.
Well, because I think you said it right.
Did I? Happenstance? I don't know. I met him just before Gary set the fastest known time on the Wonderland Trail because he was completing his very own Wonderland excursion. I'll mention this story as we introduce him, but we're going to introduce our guest, Christof Teuscher, here in just a second. He just recently crossed the Grand Canyon 8 times. Unbelievable undertaking. So not only is he an adventurer, an ultra runner, but he's also a filmmaker. He makes and documents all of these wonderful films about his adventures. They are a blast to watch. I remember watching some of his work years ago. I'm going to talk about this with him because I have questions and all sorts of stuff. So if you are watching live, Kim will be joining us here just a second once she takes care of the dog. But jump into the chat room if you have questions for any of us, including Christof, our guest tonight. Before we introduce Christof in person, we have some individuals that we like to thank at the top of every episode. First and foremost, all of our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/thegingerrunner. For as little as $1 a month, they support all of what we do here, from podcasts to reviews to films to everything. So thank you to all of our Patreon supporters month in and month out for supporting us, especially as we go into the holiday season. We know that it takes it's tough to support stuff like this. So we really appreciate that added support. 3 individuals in particular at that top tier we like to shout out at the beginning of every episode. They really do make a huge difference in our ability to do this week in and week out. First and foremost, Mr. Chris Lee. Chris Lee lives in Hong Kong and organizes a company called Trailblazer, showcasing all of the amazing trails in the Hong Kong area. Recently, he announced that he was doing their first actual event under the Trailblazer name called the Can Run. The Can Run is an event that's about 25K. I think there's shorter distances where you carry a donated can of food in your backpack until you get to the finish and you donate it to a great cause. It's a wonderful event. If you are in the Hong Kong area, please check it out. Registrations, I believe, close this coming week, so definitely check that out. Rick Bjarnason and his team at cheekymonkeymedia.ca, their Canadian company right there in British Columbia that designed some of the craziest, amazing websites across the globe, big companies. Rick himself is an ultra runner and trained and attempted the Sinister 7 this year in Canada, really difficult ultra, as well as Fat Dog 120, which unfortunately was canceled due to smoke and fires and stuff this year, but he's a talented ultra runner and just a badass dude. So big shout out to Rick. And finally, Brian Sands, our wonderful audience member who tunes into all of the live shows, wonderful community member, just last week gave back to the community, gave us an entry to the Orchestone Trail Camp to give away, which is amazing. But he ran his first marathon last year, ran his first 50K this summer, and is currently training for his first 50-miler next year. So shout out to Brian and all of our Patreon crew. Much love and appreciation. Thank you. All right. Without further ado, I think we've already got tons of questions too in the chat room.
We do, yeah.
So our guest, Christof Teuscher, is coming to us from Portland, Oregon. It is awesome to have him on the show. Without further ado, here he is, Christof.
Yay!
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Of course, man. It is awesome to finally have you on the show. I met you years ago, but it was a happenstance. Yeah. It was totally random. So you were just completing the Wonderland loop as Gary was starting. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah.
How many times have you done Wonderland?
I hacked it once and I ran it once, so twice total. Yeah.
But you've done so much Pacific Northwest epic stuff, right? Like I think you've done the Pacific Crest Trail, the Wonderland. I can't imagine how many routes you've done in the Northwest. Is there anything that you haven't done?
Oh yeah, there's always routes that I haven't done. Yeah, it's surprising how much there actually is out there. So that's really cool here. Right, there's just so much. Yeah.
So I want to start kind of because not only do you do ultras, I know that you do longer events and you're a big time runner, but you have started to do these like bigger adventure epic lines where you map out a really beautiful route combining multiple trails and mountains and ranges. What was that journey like for you? When did you start ultra running, and then when did you start dabbling in the bigger stuff, like your own design?
Very recently, I would say. I really started running 5 years ago, and I just wasn't a runner before, and so for me, it's still a new thing, and sort of getting into these designing routes and then trying to attempt these routes. That's even more recent, and I think it's inspired by the community. People turns out like that kind of thing. They like to follow a route and go out and challenge themselves, and so do I. So it kind of like addresses, I think, a need and the wish from the runners community.
Do you have a preference to an organized event versus a Christof supports himself sort of scenario?
No, they're all different. But I realize that many people just enjoy going out and running a route for themselves, and they don't necessarily need the support. And it's different. It's a challenge that is certainly different from a race. So I think it addresses a group of people that are interested in that type of challenge, and that's really cool.
I'm realizing that he said he just started running like 5 years ago. That is crazy to me because I thought just based off of your ultra sign up, your resume, some of the things that you've done, I'd go, oh no, Christof has been doing this since he was born. Like
right.
He was born in the mountains and like climbs epic peaks and stuff like that. That's interesting.
Not at all.
What drew you to it then? Not just running, but like going big.
Well, running is so incremental, and it all started by a friend asking me, hey, would you do a 50K? And I had no clue what a 50K even was. And so I said yes, very naively. And here I was training for a 50K, and then from a 50K became a 50-miler, then a 100-miler. And then you just kind of keep going. And I always felt it's sad if you if you have that sort of like, physical shape and form and endurance that you just stop. So I just keep going. And it's, ultimately it's really fascinating to me to explore these limits mentally, physically, and obviously the aspect of being outside and discovering the Pacific Northwest or any other of these amazing places. That's a huge plus. So it's not just about endurance and, pushing your own limits, but it's also about discovering nature and beautiful things.
Is it a constant challenge from a logistics standpoint? I mean, each adventure that I've been following you for a while, so I know that you have these different lines and different projects that you've created. The logistics seem to be just wildly different for each scenario.
Yeah.
That's the case, or?
That is certainly the case, and I also really enjoy that aspect. The whole planning, and I can spend hours, if not days, in an Excel spreadsheet coming up with my pace and calculate calories and whatnot. I really thrive with that kind of like sort of all encompassing aspect of an adventure, and not just hey, you show up and you run, which is great, but there's other aspects that I think you can thrive in, and just figuring out how much calories you need and how much water you need and where you need to support and whatnot. That can be in itself a really cool challenge to solve, and so I enjoy that very much.
The question will inevitably come up in my own mind. It already has, but I'll ask it later. Is if any of these calculations and any of these plans did not go according to plan. I imagine that is the case. But before we get to that, of course, we do have live questions. So if you're watching live, drop into the chat.
We have a lot of live questions rolling in. A lot of people would love to go through your book collection that's behind you. There's a lot of people very intrigued, wondering what Christof reads. There's a great question from Nathaniel in the chat room. Nathaniel asked, Christof, you've competed in some incredibly challenging races. Which of them is the most memorable and why?
Probably the Spine race that was earlier this year in England. It was one of those races that it's sort of like semi-adventure type of things. You have to be fairly self-sufficient, carry quite a bit of gear, and just the variety of conditions I encountered there, from pouring rain for days to snow and whatnot, just was overall extremely challenging. You had the navigation, you had the fact that you have to carry a lot of your calories and whatnot. So that to me is one of the most memorable races, and perhaps the second one is Tour de Giants in Italy, and that's also a very challenging race for various reasons. And just the scenery is absolutely magic there, and I have so many good memories, but also a lot of bad ones where I remember it's just like, okay, this is it, I'm quitting, but then you continue for whatever reason, and that's the moments that you remember, obviously.
We're definitely going to start to ask Christof of like how you get through those lows where we'll talk about it with the Grand Canyon specifically, because I know just even in your video you talk a bit about there's a moment where you're like, I'm only going to get one double crossing. Like you're only going to do one rim to rim to rim. Right. That is obviously not what ended up happening, but like getting through those moments. So we'll talk about that, of course, in tonight's episode.
Cool.
I do want to start talking about this epic adventure that you just undertook. So the Grand Canyon in and of itself, people have this on their bucket list. The rim to rim to rim crossing is kind of this iconic trail running thing to check off your list. Obviously, in recent years, it's become more and more popular, which has put some stress on that the trails themselves, the ecosystem, the infrastructure, the rangers, the horse wranglers, and all sorts of stuff like that. So for this undertaking, did you have to go through any departments, or did you have to check with the people who would, the rangers and stuff like that? Or was it so late in the season? I feel like it is unseasonably. It's great conditions down there right now, but were you kind of the only one in the canyon and you were able to just do this on your own?
No, it was super busy, and there were lots of people actually, even at night, because I think it was full moon, and that for some reason really a lot of people felt that I guess that's a good night to run. And so I never was alone, and I was surprised actually, based on, I think it was 4 years ago I went for the last time to a rim to rim to rim, and the number of people just kind of exploded as far as I could tell. Not just runners, but also hikers.
Yeah. So this undertaking, let's go ahead and find out why. What is your reasoning behind not only doing a rim to rim to rim, but doing a eight time crossing of the Grand Canyon? Where did this come from?
I think it probably goes back to when I discovered that the ultra pedestrian did 6, and I was like, I remember I was staring at his blog post, and I just couldn't understand how could he possibly have done this. And I go, years later now, this kind of like came up very, very, very recently. I go like, okay, why don't I try to do 8? Because somebody has already done 6, so 8 is kind of the next level. I didn't want to do 7 and then do a ride back or something like that. So 8 was the next level, and as always, there's a lot of uncertainty. You never feel ready for that kind of thing. You just have to go and do it and see what happens, and that's kind of what I did.
And had you done a crossing at all before?
Yeah, I hiked it twice and did a rim to rim to rim once, not very successfully. And so this time I knew kind of what I was getting into, but 8 obviously is different than 1. So there was still a lot of uncertainty.
It's such an interesting, undertaking. By the way, Kim, Gus needs to go to the restroom. So Kim's taking him outside. So it's such an interesting undertaking because, most people would look at this and go, one crossing is enough. A double crossing is that extra added punch, especially for ultra runners. But then doing it so many additional times, did you give yourself that ability to sort of pull out, like you're in your mind where you're going, I'm going to attempt 8, but I'm going to hope for 4? I mean, did you sort of have that mindset, or did you go in, I want to get 8. I want to set the new, I guess, the only known person to go across 8 times.
No, my approach is definitely you have to go in with what you want to do. If you give yourself a way out, you're most likely gonna take that way out. So really, what you want to make sure is that it's hard for you to quit, but it's also easy for you to continue. And I think the right mindset is really, really key. And I really went in and wanted to do 8, even though after the first crossing, I was like, okay, but then somehow I kept going. But if I had, the mindset of, okay, let's try 8, but maybe 6 is fine, I don't think I would have had pulled it off.
So an interesting question here in the chat room from Miriam. She's asking, what was the motivation behind 4? Why not more? So why did you only do 4 rim to rim to rims as opposed to like 10?
I like to give or provide the opportunity for others to go in and try it, and I've done that for other mountains where I figure, okay, I could possibly do more, but first of all, I wasn't mentally ready. But it's also, I think, really nice to have room for improvement. Whether that's somebody else or myself, eventually, it doesn't really matter. But I think it's more attractive for people now to go out and say, hey, I can do perhaps 10. Let's see if I can beat Christof. And that to me has appeal because it motivates others and inspires others to go out and beat these records.
That's what a cool mindset. Rather than just come out and want to do it 10 times or whatever, you did it a specific number of times to be the first and fastest at that number of times, but then also leaving it open for someone else to come out and to top it. Like, what a wonderful invitation, I guess.
I hope so. I hope so. People will take me up on that and really try it.
If that is the case, me too. I'm like, I'm already blown away with an 8 crossing. Imagine a 9 or a 10. If that does happen, an 8 or a 9, 10 crossing, would you then come back and try to reclaim?
Probably not. No, I think I've seen it. But who knows? It depends. But 8 was pretty rough, and I think there's room for improvement, but I'm not sure that's going to be me.
You mentioned that it's tough, and this is where I want to start talking about, like, how did it play out? You obviously chose a great time of year. The temperatures are a bit cooler, at least compared to summer temps and temps that we've experienced down there. So how did the logistics play out for this? Were you down there solo? Were you down there with a crew? Did you bring food with you? Did you have an aid station? Like, let's kind of get through some of the logistics of how you planned this out.
It was pretty straightforward. My wife was providing support at the South Rim. and I carried all the food for the 42 miles. I didn't have any support on the North Rim. I mean, that part one, rim to rim crossing is not really a big difficulty in itself in terms of carrying food and water. The water was still running on it at most places, so it was pretty easy. The conditions were, as you're pointing out, ideal. Temperatures were ideal. The weather was great. I mean, it was just pretty much as good as it could possibly get.
And then the route, was the route anything specific, or was it kind of a route that people have come to know?
I took the South Kaibab and the North Kaibab just because that's what most people do when they do records and whatnot. I've done the Bright Angel before. It's a little longer. You have water on the way, so there's pros and cons. But the South Kaibab worked really well for me.
Go ahead, Kim.
Oh, forgive me if this was asked while I was.
It's okay. You weren't
tending
actually
to
on that long. But...
There's been a few people, including Tobias in the chat room, that wanted to know what your fueling was like during the rim to rim.
Yeah. So just going off the logistics piggyback, let's dive into. I mean, I'm assuming your nutrition is probably dialed in for most of these adventures, but what do you do?
A lot of gels. They just work for me. Energy bars, nuts, Pringles, and cookies. You know, whatever feels okay. I always have like a range of things that I can choose from. I don't typically eat a lot of food, but it's not that I'm dialed in. Sometimes I get it completely wrong, and I feel like, okay, I just can't do it with that, and give me something else. But it really varies widely on whatever conditions I see and however I feel. So it's not like I figured it out. Not at all, I think, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, we've heard stories from people who have done these big long adventures where there comes a point when the specific nutrition maybe you're used to just stops working. Have you encountered that before, exactly, where you're carrying
absolutely,
2,000 calories and that's all you got? How do you get through it?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you just can't eat what you have. And I remember, I think it was on the third crossing, I had this summer sausage in my support pack up on the rim, and I go, okay, maybe I'll crave this. I had no clue if I was actually going to eat it or not, but this was the best thing I could ever have at that moment. I figured out a little later, and I was eating the whole sausage. And usually I'm not into that kind of food at all, but it just really worked that time. So it's a crap shot in many ways, and what works one time may not work the next time. So it's about, having some options and figuring out what works in that specific moment.
We'll get to some more live questions here in just a second. You have a video that you shot, and this is one thing I love that you do, Christof. As a filmmaker myself and someone who's tried to document my runs to a degree, I love that you do this, and you've been doing it for a long time. With this one, you talked about that first crossing being like you hit a pretty rough patch coming back, right? So
yeah.
What happened? Were you able to identify what happened, and how did you get through? Because you still had 3 more double crossings left. It's so weird. I'm sorry. It's so weird.
I don't know. Crazy. I know. It's weird for me too. And sometimes it needs very little. It's just a little gel perhaps, or some calories, or something to drink that really changes your mood. And the fact that I made it up on the rim, and that I saw my wife, and usually she asks, well, I don't see any blood, I don't see anything that will prevent you from keeping going, and I would really have to have a really good excuse, and so she keeps me going as well. So that is another really helpful thing. But I felt I couldn't quit. Basically, I didn't have a good reason, and that often happens for these long adventures. I'm looking constantly for reasons to quit, but I can't find anything that really will be a valid reason, so I just keep going. And so that's what I did. I just kept going, went down again, and the second rim to rim was, I think, actually worse. I was throwing up on the North Rim, really felt terrible. But it's one of these instances where you just keep going with a little bit of patience. Things will improve. That is usually the case, and they did. And soon thereafter, I was feeling pretty well. And when I came back from the third rim to rim, I was absolutely certain I would go out, which was never something I would have even considered after the first. And so things can change rather quickly.
we talk about that a lot on this show. A lot of our guests talk about that, reaching these lows where they're throwing up, or they have nutrition issues, or they have sun issues, like too much heat, or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And we hear the stories of them turning it around, and it always sounds so easy, and I know it's not. How long do you think the duration was of you being in a bad space and finally kind of clicking over to getting it done?
Again, it varies widely for me. I remember certain pilots I've done where I felt really sick, and it took the whole night, literally, until I got through that sort of like, difficult, dark spot. But this time on the North Rim, it was maybe 2 hours, and I felt really good again. And that was unpredictable, and I was expected to have way more difficulties. Sometimes I need some sleep, but this time it was just fine, keep moving. And so, again, it's one of these things that you think you figured it out, but really you don't have no clue, and every time is different. So I just improvise. And I think that is really a key for these big things. There is going to be something that will go terribly wrong, for sure. No matter how well you train, no matter how well you plan, something will go wrong. And the ability to deal with that situation, improvise, and keeping going, that I think is really, really important.
I'm always really curious with the mindset and the desire. We know that we're going to get to these low places when we take on these giant challenges. We know that it's never going to be 100%. It's never going to be this beautiful. I never had a low.
Right.
What draws you to those places? Do you have like the ability to determine those places that your mind goes, your body goes, and why you find yourself in them and enjoy them, or returning to them?
You mean the dark places or the good places?
Well, let's talk about both. Yeah, because I'm thinking the dark places, because we know, especially with these larger adventures, it's not going to be a cakewalk. So you do them often, and you find yourself probably going back to these sorts of dark places. What draws you back to those? But then also, what draws you back to the positives?
Yeah, very good question. I don't have an answer really, and it's not that I'm driven to these dark places. They appear out of nowhere sometimes, and you're just there. But I kind of take this mindfulness approach in the sense that it's important to live in the moment. And okay, it's a dark place, fine, but a minute later you may be in another beautiful spot suddenly where you're like, oh my God, this view is amazing, or suddenly you feel much better. And right, you've switched from a very dark place to an absolutely ecstatic place suddenly. And it's not that I can control these things, but I think it's more about accepting these dark and not so dark places. And if you accept that, and if you accept that you're going to go through these phases, that's okay, and I can live with that. So it's more like that. Yeah.
Do you find that I keep telling Kim, let's go to a live question, and then a question keeps popping into my head.
All good.
So I'll ask one, and then we'll ask more here. Just regarding, do you find with the longer adventures, these, an 8 crossing of the Grand Canyon is a perfect example since it just occurred, so it's probably still fresh in your cells.
Yeah.
Is the elation upon completion a greater sensation than after finishing a 50K, 50 miler, 100 miler, those sorts of things, because of so much personalization in the project? Do you get a bigger reward?
I don't think so. No, not for me. Perhaps for other folks that will be the case, but no, I feel you can run a 10K and have a PR and whatnot and be very ecstatic about that, as much as when you do these big things. Oftentimes I'm really super tired, I just want to sleep or something. So it kicks in much later, and you realize much later, oh, this is actually what I've done. That's crazy. That's an interesting realization sometimes, but I think it's absolutely possible to have the same feeling if you're doing a 10K or a marathon or a 50K. It's all relative.
Yeah, amazing. Kim's been very patient. She's been wrangling.
Like dog wrangling.
He's like, I don't know what's going on
tonight. He just really wants to see Christof, I think.
Yeah, he's like, I like Christof so much.
Yeah.
Hey. So cute.
Interesting question from Scout in the chat room. Scout asks, Christof, I've tried to explain the beauty of finding new things on multi-crossing routes, and folks don't always get it. Did you find yourself particularly intrigued anywhere late in the run?
Yeah, a lot. And I think that happens to me a lot, even if I do like repeated things and you think you're on the same trail, but suddenly you realize a view that you've never actually paid attention to. But I think more important for me were the people that I encountered on the trail in the canyon. The word had spread, and they were calling my name. Hey, Christof, there you are! And it was just really inspiring to see some folks 2-3 times, and they were so helpful in keeping me going, and that was a huge inspiration. So each rim to rim to rim crossing for me felt very, very different. And it wasn't like I was repeating and being bored just by doing the same trail. Not at all. It was really, first of all, the daytime was different. And then the people, and you see different things. So I never really felt bored at all. In fact, I thought I was going to listen to music, but I never listened to any music because it was just really entertaining to go back and forth and talk to people and enjoy as much as I could enjoy things.
It took just around 58 hours, a little bit over 58 hours, right?
Yeah.
So what a unique thing to be able to see the canyon, not only 8 different ways, but at different times of day, and all these different experiences. Was there ever a moment that was pure magic? I know the canyon in itself is pure magic, but was there a moment that stands out for you as, wow?
I think the nights, for me, the nights are often really something I enjoy, and this time with the moon and the stars, many miles I could do without a headlamp and just really enjoy the environment, and you can listen to the sounds of nature and whatnot. And so these are really extremely pleasant moments in many ways, even though you may be hurting and whatnot. But just the beauty of being out there is amazing in itself. And there were many of these moments, and that was certainly very special. Yeah.
I can't even imagine. I'm just like, I'm so inspired, man. Like, just doing something like this in such a beautiful location and being able to just to be able to see so much and all on foot. It's amazing. Let's get to some more live questions. Sorry.
Yeah, there's a question from Travis in the chat room. Travis asked, to complete something this big, which is more important, the physical or the mental training?
Definitely mental. I think from the very beginning, it was pretty clear to me that this was going to be a mental game. I've done longer distances, so I was somewhat confident that I could possibly pull it off, but you never know with the elevation game. You could, get injured rather quickly. But clearly, that's the mental aspects, I think, were much more important. The fact that you're deciding to keep going and, just imagining that you were going to do it again and again. Again, that's really tough on your mind, and it's exactly what I experienced after the first double crossing. I just couldn't imagine. I couldn't possibly imagine doing this again. But then somehow you have to get in that mindset to actually go out and just do it again and not worry about the 4th time. It's about getting to the North Rim, and then from there you go back to the South Rim, and you just kind of decompose things into chunks that you can manage, that your mind can sort of wrap around itself. And I think that is way more important for these types of adventures than your physical fitness.
What were the dangers for this one? So, and I mean dangers, I guess, both of harm or like pushing yourself to whatever limit. Heat normally, would be that situation. But also, what were the dangers of the things that would make Christof go, I'm done? What were those sorts of things that you knew that you had to overcome to accomplish such a task?
Injuries, I guess. I think I was pretty confident that I could handle the hydration and I wouldn't get dehydrated and things like that. But sometimes you roll an ankle or you fall somewhere stupid, and things are over, and that's always a possibility. So I'm mostly afraid of injuries, and there isn't really much you can do once something starts hurting, and you can tape or whatever, but that can only do so much. And so that was probably the biggest, I think, fear that I had at the very beginning, that something sort of stupid might happen.
This question,
but thankfully it didn't. So
yeah, I was going to say, you're here, you're fine. I know that nothing happened. You managed to get it done. This question popped up in the chat room too from Nathaniel, which I thought was great, and I wanted to touch on a little bit today, and that's just work balance. So not only were you able to accomplish this adventure, but you have many adventures under your belt, many races under your belt. What do you do, and how are you able to sort of balance the training, the adventures, the events, all that stuff? How are you able to find that balance?
It's sort of a nice symbiosis that I think I found in terms of work versus, play, you can say. And to me, if I go running, often it's a way for me to disconnect, but it's also a way for me to solve problems that I may not be able to solve in my office, because it refreshes my mind. I come back with totally new perspectives very often. And so it's a really nice combination sort of between that, pushing your mind versus pushing your body. And so I think I found the balance that works for me. And, I think the other aspect is getting things organized, and I'm pretty good at, doing the planning and being efficient with, these things. So I can work full time, but still do a lot of these adventures, just because I can organize things rather straightforwardly and smoothly, I think.
Are you training like at 3 or 4 in the morning for these things, or do you have like a regular schedule of, I get off work at 5 and I can go get my run in, that sort of thing?
I do, yeah. I get up before 5 and I run. It's just, part of my routine. I just do it no matter how I feel. Yeah. And I think that is important. And, it's not taking away, I think, time that I could do other things or be otherwise productive. For me, that is a way to increase my productivity. And I think the average American watches something like 30 hours of TV a week. And I always say, people say, how do you have time for that? Well, you just don't watch TV. You just go running, basically. And so that's a way for me to, I think, spend the time wisely, hopefully.
I love it. It's like, it is that simple.
That makes perfect sense.
Makes perfect sense. Because I think I watched 30 hours of TV today. The math doesn't work out, but yeah. We do, again, have some live questions. If you have live questions for Christof about his adventure, whether it's the 8-time rim crossing at the Grand Canyon, which is just mind-blowing, or any of his adventures, because he's done a lot of things, ask them in the chat room now, and Kim will pull them aside. What do you got, Kim?
Gus is just like making this a exciting show tonight.
Not only apologies to our live audience, but also apologies to Christof, because for the first time in like months, Gus is doing everything.
He really is
raw right now.
Question from Brian in the chat room. Brian asked, you've traveled around the world to attend several epic races. What other races around the world would you like to go to and run?
There's a couple of races in New Zealand, Australia, and perhaps other places that I've been eyeing. I'm always looking for new things because it makes things more interesting. I rarely do the same race twice. Sometimes I do, but it's not really so exciting, I guess. Sometimes you can improve yourself, but sometimes it's all about, discovering something new and find out that, well, actually, maybe you're not so good at doing 100-miler because this route was really challenging, or the conditions were just way beyond what you thought they would be. And so I'm always up for new challenges, and I think that makes it more exciting.
Do you, I guess now with this 8-time crossing of the Grand Canyon, do you try to outdo each accomplishment? So are you going to try to find something else that takes it to the next level, or do you kind of go through an ebb and flow of interesting lines and projects and stuff like that? How does it work for you?
Bigger is not always better in my experience. There's many smaller things that may be more challenging than doing this Grand Canyon thing, which I think got a lot of attention just because it's, as you said, it's one of these bucket list runs. But I think I've done other things that were perhaps more challenging and that, had no attention or didn't, get to that level of attention. And so, no, it's not about doing more. Sometimes it's quality. Sometimes you have this specific mountain that you want to climb for some specific reason, and it's just because it's challenging in itself, and perhaps nobody has ever done it and whatnot. So I think there's a wide variety of challenges that I find interesting, and so it's not just about mileage and elevation gain. There's other things.
what sort of advice, because I'm going to take stuff from this show, I'm going to take this sort of like, what I love about it is that, and just knowing kind of how you plan things, is you find cool places to go. I know a lot of your stuff around the Pacific Northwest. I look at the lines, I look at the trail connections and stuff, and it's like, wow, I've never even thought about going to that area, or I've never known about that trail or those ridge lines. For those who are watching and other people who are going to be inspired by your 8 crossing of the Grand Canyon and then your other adventures once they discover just how much you've actually done, what advice do you have for those who want to undertake adventures for themselves, whether big or small? Do you have like advice to those maybe starting it for the first time and starting their own adventures?
I think very often it's about going out and actually doing it. And many people have, great plans, great ambitions, but I realize they never actually do these things. And I think what matters is that you start somewhere, whatever that level is, but you go out and do these things. And then the second part I think is important is failing. You want to be willing and able to fail. And that's something I think people don't realize, how often I go out and fail. And that's not the things that you see online where people click 500 times and like something, right? That's stuff that I have to deal with on my own. But people don't realize that for many of these big adventures, I went out 5, 6, 7, 8 times, maybe more, failed miserably, learned each time, then went again. And what at the end result is, okay, the big thing, and he did it great, but you forget about all the times I failed. So I think that it's normal that you're totally afraid of failing and you don't want to fail. You never want to fail, but that's just part of that adventure spirit, I think, that you need to have. So I would encourage folks to go out and fail and learn from these failures and just do it again. Don't give up just because once maybe the conditions weren't right or you didn't feel it. That's okay, right? Maybe next time you'll nail it. And that's, to me, that's the beauty in running as well. It's so incremental, right? You start with something, you get it to the next level, you keep going. If you're willing to put in the time and the effort, you can really do really amazing things. And there aren't any shortcuts, really. It's about training, it's about dedicating your time, it's about passion. And if you're willing to go that route, then you can do really amazing things. And it's not that I have any special gifts or anything like that. I'm just willing to put in the time and suffer. And I think that's the whole magic.
I love that Christof is one of the best sufferers out there because we get to follow along.
I don't know about that.
We get to follow along these really cool adventures. I love that you said that about failure, just because I think that applies to the adventure side of things, but I also think it applies to our audience who are either ultra runners, seasoned ultra runners, or some people are maybe thinking about dabbing their toe into the pool of ultra running. Failing, and this, I've learned my lesson very recently too. Like, failing is a part of the process, an important part of the process, and I think
and a normal part of the process.
normal part of the process. And hearing someone like Christof just say, "Do it," like fail, and be open to that. It's important in the process. Very recently, you mentioned this route. It's in the Olympic National Park. It's this incredible. It just looks massive. And Christof basically announced this, like, "Hey, look, I came up with this route." And I think you went and attempted some of it, but you had a pretty rough go during that, right?
Yeah, it's a 324 miles, I think, loop, or 5 loops.
No big deal. 5 loops to the Olympics.
5 loops, almost 100,000 feet of elevation gain. To me, it's sort of like I always had this idea of 5 rings because of the Olympic rings. Yes. And so I was staring at this Olympics map for days, literally, and figured out finally routes that would, look like 5 rings. And so I attempted one of these rings and just, to get my homework done. And I didn't plan to do the whole thing because that is a lot of logistics and whatnot. But it's a perfect example of failing. And it's not like I was frustrated. It's quite the opposite. I learned, many lessons that I think will be valuable once I go out again and do it again. And so that is, as you said before, it's part of the process. It's absolutely normal. You basically have to fail if you're pushing your limits to that sort of level where it is, it's a very fine line between failing and succeeding, and it's just part of it.
I love it. I would love for everyone who's watching live to go follow Christof. Just follow his adventures, get inspired. Go check out his website, ChristofTeuscher.com. Lots of great blogs there, just kind of documenting his adventures. And I know I use that term a lot tonight, just adventures, but it really is cool to see what Christof's been up to.
Yeah.
I remember watching one of your old videos. I think you tagged. What was it? You ran, I think, from like the Three Sisters to Mount Hood or something like that. Was there some crazy route that you did down there?
It was the 5 Oregon peaks over 10,000 feet that I figured, well, it would be nice to connect these together and just do them all. And yeah, it was one of these things where I was like having this idea, but I had no clue whether I could actually do it. And I went out and it worked okay. I didn't manage to climb all the peaks perfectly, but I finished and wrapped it up, and so it was a good adventure.
It always is. It always seems like it is, even when it's not. It is as a spectator standpoint.
Right.
You're like, this is great.
Yeah.
It's so entertaining. So Christof, if you could remind people where they can find you on social media and stuff like that, I know you're going to have a lot of new fans.
ChristofTeuscher.com. Yeah, that's the easiest. That's my blog, and there's a link to my Facebook and a YouTube channel, so I'm pretty easy to find.
Great. Yeah, go to ChristofTeuscher.com and definitely subscribe to his YouTube channel as well. If you are into ultra running or just into adventuring or pushing your body and the limits, his videos are great. They're wonderful documents showcasing what he's done out there for years now. He's been doing this for a long time. So big ups to Christof, and thank him for joining us on tonight's show.
You.
We do have some residual live questions. Of course, we're going to get to those in the post show.
Sure, yeah.
Or let's get to one before we go into the post show, but we'll do that.
Sure.
But of course, with our first-time guests, we always like to do a little segment that we call the Quickie Question Quiz. Christof, it's very easy. Here's how it goes down. I have a series of 10 very rapid-fire, very simple questions. All you got to do is answer with the first thing that comes to your brain, and we will move on immediately to the next question. When you are ready to take this Quickie Question Quiz, just give me a thumbs up, and we'll go right into it.
Let's do it.
Okay. What was your very first race?
The Burning Man 50K.
That is unexpected. Burning Man 50K was your first?
Exactly, yeah. Exactly.
Were you clothed?
I was, but
Okay.
I wasn't the only one who had clothes on. There were people running it completely naked without shoes. 50K. I was very impressed, let me tell you that.
I know that it's become quite a thing, and it's actually like a pretty substantial amount of people that run it now.
It was an interesting race.
Favorite place to run currently?
The Columbia Gorge, I guess.
Road or trails?
Trail.
Bucket list race?
I don't know. Hard Rock.
Favorite running movie?
The Ginger Runner movies.
That's correct. That is the only correct answer. I think I know the answer to this based off of your answer earlier, but guilty pleasure TV show.
I don't have a TV.
Perfect. I knew it. Pre-race meal. What did you eat the night before Grand Canyon 8 octuple crossing?
Usually some pasta, some carbs, something. Could be pizza, could be pasta, whatever. I'm not really complicated with eating.
I like that. I can appreciate that. And the word pizza is magic. Favorite post-race indulgence?
Beer.
And finally, current running shoes, or what did you run the octuple crossing in?
Hoka's ATR4s.
That's it.
Yeah.
You passed.
Thank
Congratulations. I actually like it because you're one of the very first people to also answer like precisely and distinctly.
Yeah.
I so often we'll have conversations about the questions, but I'm like, Christof nailed it. Quick and to the point. Just awesome to have you on the show, Christof. Again, congratulations on the 8-time crossing of the Grand Canyon. Like the end mileage was 168 miles.
Yeah, that is 58 miles. Okay.
58,000 feet again?
Yeah, 44-ish thousand. Yeah.
44-ish thousand feet again.
Yeah.
Give or take.
Give or take. Yeah.
Man, just amazing. And again, for those who are watching live or listening to the podcast, Christof did make a video about this event, or not event, but undertaking. Mm-hmm. It is on his YouTube channel now. I highly encourage you to go to check it out. Leave a comment on it. Let him know that you found out about it from Ginger Runner Live. But thank you so much, Christof, for joining us on the show, man. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a great pleasure.
We are going to move into the post show. We're going to actually keep Christof a little bit longer. He's in an air-trapped room. He has about 10 minutes of air, so we're going to keep him for about 10 minutes for our post show. We like to do a post show with our guests every single Monday. We do this specifically to ask questions that did not get asked during the main show, as well as get questions from our GR crew members. So if you are a GR crew member, we'll see you guys in just a couple of seconds. If you are not, and you don't even know what that is, just head on over to patreon.com/thegingerrunner. Literally for as little as $1 a month, which is a fraction of a cup of coffee these days. It gets you access to all of the post shows, either live or archived. And we would love to see you over there. It helps the show. It helps everything that we do here. So much, much appreciated. Otherwise, we'll see all of you members over there in just a couple of seconds. Am I forgetting anything?
I don't think so.
We got to get that Gus cam hooked up.
Oh, man, he's snoozing
now. He's like 100% out. And, of course, right towards the end of the show. Typical Gus. Big thank you to our guest tonight, Christof Teuscher, and his amazing accomplishments in taking time for tonight's episode 235 of Ginger Runner Live. Now concluded. See you guys next week.
Bye.